Joining me now to talk a little motorsports, Jordan Bianchi from The Athletic. Hey, Jordan, thanks for joining me.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Plenty to talk about for sure.
I know, you look at the sort of big story with motorsports heading into this year, and there's a lot going on. 75th anniversary of NASCAR, centennial of Le Mans, and you've got these Formula One teams, some of which are launching their seasons in the United States. I mean, the excitement around Drive to Survive has clearly had a tangible effect on the way that Americans are sort of receiving that sport that seems so elusive in the past. How would you describe the year that we are in?
It seems like motorsports is having a bit of a renaissance. I don't want to say that it's a full renaissance, but if you look at Formula One, obviously they've been able to penetrate the U.S. market very successfully. Not one, not two, but now they're going to have 3 Grand Prix within the United States, in Miami, in Austin, Texas, and in Las Vegas. And those events are sold out and in high demand and ticket sales. And you mentioned the car launches. Red Bull a couple weeks ago launched its car in New York City of all places, and also during that launch announced that they had entered a new partnership with Ford. So you have all of that stuff on the Formula One side, which is tremendous because that is a form of motorsport that really has not had an opportunity. It really has been unsuccessful in the United States largely. And then you look at NASCAR, and after a downturn, which I think is fair to say, they have found their footing, and there's a lot of energy now behind them. They've got a revamped schedule. They continue to add new and exciting events, whether it's at the LA Coliseum or downtown Chicago. You've got young drivers emerging. It was a downturn, as you know, with a lot of veterans stepping away, and now you had a Chase Elliott and a Kyle Larson and some other young drivers come to the forefront. So it does seem like motorsports right now is on the upswing.
I was at that Red Bull launch in New York at the Classic Car Club. And when you talk to Christian Horner, who now is a worldwide celebrity because of Drive to Survive, you get the sense that he really sees the value in having this stuff in America and understanding the sponsorship dollars and the sort of commercial link to all of this. And it seems like he's really leaned into the idea. It was nothing but smiles and excitement from Max Verstappen and Checo. They have come around to this idea that 3 circuits in the United States is a good thing for what has always been probably the pinnacle of motorsports, right? I mean, like the sexiest sort of tour with the big stars that are global, and we all know about Monaco. Now it seems like something has really changed there, where they want to make their footprint in the United States and be the team that America sort of roots for.
It seems like, to your point, they have embraced it, and now they're getting a response. This has always been the great untapped market. And there's been pushes before, and there's been times we felt like maybe there was progress being made, but it was never sustainable. This feels sustainable. And not only do you have Red Bull, you've got McLaren and their CEO, Zach Brown, who understands this market very, very well, and they're doing a great job. And you still have Haas, Formula One, which is not a team that a lot of people talk about, but they are owned by an American, and they have tried to kind of identify themselves as an American team. So you have all these teams right now kind of trying to fight for that label of being the United States' team. And it's interesting to see, but it's good because it is giving them new ideas, and it's kind of opening up a new avenue to how they're doing things. Because, for so long, Formula One was seen as this sport that was really roped off. It didn't allow people behind the curtain to see what was going on behind the scenes. And now with Drive to Survive, and I don't think that can be stated enough, people get a glimpse behind the curtain and they want more of it. It's a personality-driven thing where I think motorsports has done a good job, NASCAR as this as well. There's a lot of people that aren't into cars themselves, aren't into the technology aspect of it and everything that involved. And they want to know personalities, and they want to know about the drama and all of that stuff. And they're selling that now. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I was kind of struck by, it was freezing the day that they launched this new season with this new car. And I mean, probably the coldest day we've had in the city this entire winter. And when I got there were American fans lined up outside waiting to catch a glimpse of Max Verstappen or Checo or Daniel Ricciardo, who's in the mix over there, as you know, and has embraced America. And that's when I really had this moment of like, wow, there is a practical application here for this TV series on Netflix that everybody is obsessed with, and they obviously see the value of that. It's interesting. I covered NASCAR a little bit a couple years back and spent a bunch of time with Kyle Petty, who was nice enough to kind of peel the curtain back and help me understand the ebb and flow of NASCAR's popularity over the last couple of decades. And exactly to your point, this renaissance is interesting because you had this, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, based on kind of my memory and conversations with him, you had these sort of golden eras of NASCAR early on where people loved cars and they wanted to go see the Ford and the Chevy. And there was that connective link because they wanted to go buy those cars. And then that downturn was very real, where you had this old school group of older drivers who did things their own way. It was generational. And I think it became exclusionary to a certain extent for a larger part of the population that they were trying to reach that just didn't understand what it was. You know, you had the good old boys who love NASCAR and know NASCAR, and you had the generational families who were born into it and stayed with it. But it just seemed like it lost its luster a bit. And so do you really feel like this year or even last year with some of the new drivers that are in is the start of some of that sort of resurgence?
It does, because a lot of these drivers are kind of becoming, I don't want to say household names because they're not to the level of a Jeff Gordon or a Dale Jr. or that level, but you know, you look at it like a Bubba Wallace, and you know, his wedding was just covered in People magazine, right? I mean, it seems silly to note that, but that's the crossover you kind of need, and you've been missing for a little bit. When you lose star power like Dale Jr. and Jeff Gordon and Tony Stewart and Danica, and it goes on, like you have a gap there, and how do you fill that? And you know, you look at guys like a Ryan Blaney who's kind of moved up a little bit, and a Chase Elliott, and so you need those personalities. Not everybody is into cars. Not everybody's into you know, that side of things, and they want the personalities and they want the drama. And what has been interesting has been how you sell your sport. It can be multiple things at once. It can be cars, and you can identify with a brand and say, that's the car I drive on the street, you know, win on Sunday, sell on Monday is the old adage. And there's some truth in that, but there's also a segment of fans who want personalities. They want the drama, or they just like the show, or they want to come for other things. And I think NASCAR, and really all sports, Formula One has done this a really good job as well, is like you offer a little bit of everything, right? You offer racing, and you offer all of that entails, but you also offer personalities and the celebrities. When I was in Miami last year for the Miami Grand Prix, you couldn't turn around without bumping into a celebrity, and it's kind of cool to be there, and it's got that vibe. And you've got the concerts and everything else, and sports are kind of adapting to that of, hey, you know, like the Phoenix Open last week, I believe had the Chainsmokers there as part of its presentation, its event. And you need that though. Like you need to offer the consumers really bang for their buck beyond just what is happening on the field, on the track, or on the course.
Yeah. And I think one of the criticisms too, Jordan, was people don't have the attention span for some of these races that are so long, and you know, and then they change the format to try to get people excited and create this drama. How has that affected what consumership is doing, and also this next gen car, which hasn't been without controversy?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, when you look at NASCAR races, and I will still argue to this day, like there are some NASCAR races that are frankly too long. And, you know, there are some that should never be touched with Daytona 500, Southern 500. But do you need a 3.5 hour race on a Sunday afternoon in July? I don't know. I think as consumer attention spans shrink, you need to have a better product. And I go back to the Coliseum race a few weeks ago in LA. That was a nice, tight 2-hour race or so, easy to digest. And that's the one thing with Formula One, I think, where if you look at Formula One, it's an hour and 45-minute race. Yeah. And it's in the morning on Sundays. It's really easy to consume, and you can go on with your day. NASCAR races are something that's a little bit more of a full meal, if you will. And they are adjusting to that. And they're realizing, like, hey, we need to have a little bit of everything here. At the end of the day, and you know this very well, it is what the TV audience is responding to, and the TV networks still want content. So you're beholden to that to some degree. But I think NASCAR has learned, like, sometimes you can do a little bit less and actually give your audience more.
They do have some intriguing personalities. I mean, there are some young drivers who I think it took them a little bit of time to come out of their shell. Ryan Blaney has a big personality and has really kind of delivered and almost had a savviness about him that I think some of the other younger drivers that are in that group, maybe it took them a little bit longer to come around. Has there been any talk of trying to explore that even further? Is NASCAR in talks with Netflix to do any kind of similar Drive to Survive series where you could really make these guys relatable?
Yeah, I mean, NASCAR has tried. I mean, they had a show last year that aired on the USA Network that was an hour, and it kind of covered the entirety of the season a little bit. And it was good. And I will say that I have to be careful here because I was a part of that show, but I thought it did a good job. Like, it did give you behind the scenes of the Drive to Survive. What the criticism of that show would be is accessibility and the time slot, and were people able to digest it. The one thing that Drive to Survive had so well was it was on Netflix, and you could sit there and binge every episode right away, and it wasn't a thing of you had to go search for it. And so NASCAR knows if you need those kind of shows. You need to have those kind of shows that are, one, out there, and two, it is easy for somebody to watch, whether it's at home, whether it's on their tablet or on the road. And that's not always easier to do, but every sport, it seems like, doing it. There's a new behind the scenes golf show that's coming out very soon, that from the Drive to Survive folks. IndyCar is going to have their own type of show. So the leagues know that they have to be out there, but you have to make sure that you put them out there in a way that's easy to consume.
Yeah, I mean, you almost have to serve it up on an absolute silver platter,
Yes.
like dump it in somebody's lap. I binged, to your point, I binged Breakpoint last night about tennis, and I went through all the episodes that are available because I had a long day and I just needed to check out. And then I was excited for the other episodes that are going to drop in June. They did like a split drop, but if I had to go and find something, I probably would have given up, which is so embarrassing to say, but I think is like representative of where everybody is. It's like you need to just put it right in your face and give you every single episode. But it does show that NASCAR is trying to be forward thinking in terms of understanding what the criticism has been for so long, which is like, you guys need to find a way to make these guys stars. And it seems like they really are now, especially for a motorsports fan who's going to go and find a race like the Daytona 500. As you sort of look at the field this weekend and think about the history of that race, which is so fun to chronicle. If anybody who's watching this hasn't really gone back to like the very beginning, early stages of the races, like, it's amazing to look at that old footage. What do you sort of forecast for such an unpredictable race this year, in terms of who might have an advantage?
I think it's going to be typical Daytona 500. It's going to be unpredictable. You look at last year's race; it was wild, and you had a finish that was the third closest in Daytona 500 history. And Daytona is one of those races. It feels like anybody can win, and the typical group of drivers, you're going to have the guys in the mix, like a Denny Hamlin or a Bubba Wallace or Ryan Blaney or Joey Logano, but you do have a lot of surprises. And if you look at the last two winners of this race, you have rookie Austin Cindric last year, and then 2 years ago was Michael McDowell, this underdog kind of out of nowhere story. So it does kind of have this mix of the traditional guys that are always fighting for the wins, and then you kind of get the upstarts and everything. I think that's what you're going to see on Sunday, and it's going to be a matter of just making it to the finish, because it's the old cliche of to finish first, you must first finish. That certainly applies to Daytona 500 when you have these massive 10, 15, sometimes 20 car wrecks that can decimate the field pretty quickly.
Yeah, and the last point we haven't really talked about, or I mean, one of the last points is the parity in the sport, which is often what people talk about too. It's like, oh, you've got the superpowers, and that's the case in Formula One and most of motorsports. I think is you've got the big juggernauts, and then you've got the little guys. Has there been any push to kind of narrow that gap? I mean, Daytona seems like a place where if you do have a crash that wipes the field out, maybe one of those guys gets through.
Yeah, and you look back a year ago, right? I mean, 19 different winners, which tied a record for the most in NASCAR history. And the new next-gen cars we talked about has really kind of introduced parity to some degree, where you have smaller or mid-sized teams, if you will, like a 2311 or a colleague or a Trackhouse Racing, able to kind of come to the forefront and contend on a regular basis with some of the bigger teams. You go back to the championship a year ago, yes, Joey Logano with Team Penske won, and they are a premier upper echelon, as good as it gets organization, but Ross Chastain, driving for second-year Trackhouse Racing, finished second in the championship. And so you have this right now with this new car. The question is whether this is sustainable or not. Was last year kind of a blip with this new car coming in and people kind of figuring it out, or now that this car is here and they've got a year underneath their belts, are the teams like the Hendricks, the Penske's, the Joe Gibbs Racings of the world going to go back to dominating week in and week out? We don't know, and that's one of the unknowns this year going into the year. But unpredictability and parity are two words that you hear a lot of in NASCAR right now. It certainly was the case a year ago. It has been the case in the Daytona 500. I think you're going to see that again in the Daytona 500, but whether that carries through or not for the rest of the year, it remains to be seen. Do
the drivers feel like this car is safe enough?
No. I mean, if you go back a year ago, I mean, you had two major injuries with Kurt Busch and Alex Bowman. They both sustained concussions. Kurt effectively his career has been put on hold. He's not racing this year, at least as of now. Alex Bowman missed, I believe, 5 races last year. There was some serious concerns with the design of this car. Basically, there was not enough give in the rear of the car, and rear impact collisions, all of the energy was not going into the car and precipitating. It was going into the driver, and they were feeling it, and they were having head injuries. Basically, their heads were snapping back in their seats because of this. NASCAR last year did a lot of testing with this car. They've added a different rear bumper to this, a different center section. The hope, their studies say that this will help kind of with that energy how that energy is absorbed, right? And so we'll see whether or not that's the case. Right now, it's too early to tell. We've only had 1 race in Las Vegas or LA, and the driver said, yeah, they could still feel it a little bit. It'll be interesting to see whether that is the case.
Do you imagine that will be the big overarching storyline of the season until they feel like the car is in a safe enough position where they're not at risk?
100%, because I mean it was a huge story really as the year moved on last year, and as you saw Kurt Busch and Alex Bowman have injuries, it was the talking point. Even amidst the championship and everything, it became the center talking point. And it's going to be that way this year because we don't know about the safety. And if the issues that were here a year ago continue to plague NASCAR, it's going to rise up to levels that probably even surpass last year, because this is a serious issue. You can't have drivers continually having head injuries and other injuries to the like. So we'll know. I think we're going to know pretty quick. I mean, we have a good idea after Sunday's race at Daytona, which can be typically a lot of accidents. And then you go to some tracks in Las Vegas and at Fontana, the next 2 or the 3 next races, where those accidents tend to happen as well. So we'll have a pretty good idea here pretty quick. And if not, if this isn't an issue, we all want that. That's great, right? But if this continues to be a problem, this is going to be the predominant storyline, at least through the early part of the year.
Yeah, I mean, heading to a track like Daytona now with this big question mark looming, you've seen some of these explosive, phenomenal sort of wrecks that have happened at this track because it is so unpredictable. I remember some NASCAR analysts telling me a long time ago that a lot of times the bigger the wreck, the worse it looks. Sometimes the better it is. It's those really tough wrecks that you don't expect to do damage that end up doing a lot of damage. But all that to say, is it a scary time right now to be heading to a track like Daytona with a big question mark like this up in the air about concussions?
Yeah, it's certainly there, and it's hard to ignore it. And it's part of. I say this gently because obviously there's a fine line between risk and you don't want to go cross that line too much. But part of the allure of motorsports, right, is that people are doing things that are supposed to be death-defying and doing things that are incredible at 200 miles an hour. And you're like, wow, how do they do that? But there is a point, though, of, hey, like, you can't be silly about this. You have to have safety parameters in place. And when you have guys continually getting hurt, it's an issue. And it's certainly something that is being talked about. It's a talking point. And until it's proven that it's not a talking point, that story is going to continue to hover there. And we just don't know. We know that what NASCAR changes have they implemented. We know what their studies say. But until you have the proof in the pudding and you have guys being able to walk away from crashes healthy and you don't have guys having to sit out races because of injury, you don't know. And until that's proven, it's going to be a giant question mark.
And this might be digging a little too deep into the weeds, but it's interesting the point that you brought up about parity in the sport. And when you drop something new into the sport, it levels the playing field to a certain extent because the new teams that have, those pre-existing teams that have all the money, there's a little bit of a catch-up phase. And I guess you have to balance that with also not dropping something into the sport that could potentially level the playing field that is dangerous and sort of unexperimented on. I mean, maybe some reason would say like, oh, we'll keep introducing new things into the sport to keep the playing field the same and to have everybody sort of have to play catch up and to have it be a little bit more even, but not at the expense of the safety of the drivers.
Never at the expense of the safety drivers. That's first and foremost. And I will always say, like, you hear a lot about costs and cost containments in motorsports and how do you have to keep the cost down. But when it comes to safety, there is no cost cap on that. There should be no cost cap on that. So that said, the other thing you have to be mindful of when you try to worry about, making sure you have a parity, right? And making sure everybody's on a competitive balance is how do you do that? Continually changing the rules in motorsports is an expensive venture, and teams are going to have to foot that bill, and that's not something a lot of teams can afford long term. So it's hard because on one hand, when you have continued evolution and it introduces parity and it introduces excitement and the unknown, that's great. But it's also an expensive thing that someone has to pay for. And more often than not, it's the teams that have to write that check.
Yeah. Which drivers are you sort of keeping your eye on that have the advantage going into the year based on everything that you've seen so far over the last couple of months?
Yeah, I mean, there's two names that immediately pop to mind. One is Chase Elliott, who won the 2020 championship and has become a perennial championship contender. Almost won it a year ago, almost won it 2 years ago. He is a guy that, you look at, he's going to win 3 to 5 races every year. He's going to be in the mix for the regular season points title and is probably going to make a deep playoff run. And the other guy is Kyle Larson, his teammate at Hendrick Motorsports. Kyle 2 years ago had a historic season. He won 10 races. He led over 2,000 laps. He just stormed to the title, and he was a driver who he's always been a driver who's been heralded as these next great Jeff Gordon, Tony Stewart type generational talent. And in 2021, he really displayed that ability to do that. He is somebody that that if the car is there and the equipment's there, he has the talent to go out there and make things happen. And then the other guy is Denny Hamlin. And Denny Hamlin, is at age 42, and I say this because I'm roughly the same age as him, but he is considered an age when drivers' talents maybe start to wane a little bit and you question whether or not they still have the same ability. But Denny, a year ago, had a really good year, won a couple races, was really won Ross Chastain miracle pass at Martinsville Speedway for making the championship 4. Denny is still a factor, and the one thing that Denny has not done in his great career is win a championship. So the years are counting down for Denny, but he is still a contender, and this it's hard to say, but this may be the last chance he has to win that championship.
And what's the reaction been like to Jimmie Johnson finding his way back to the sport?
Surprising in some aspect. I mean, this is a guy who in 2020 walked away and said, hey, I'm done. I'm good with NASCAR. I'm moving on to other things. And then it was, well, I'm coming back. And it's been open arms. Like, it's good to have Jimmie back. Like, he's a name. He's a 7-time champion. He brings all of that with him. And then the fact he's kind of stepping in the ownership side, which is a realm that Jimmie said that he didn't really have any interest in, right? And now he's taking it on his shoulders and he's really enjoying it and having fun. And I think it speaks to NASCAR, where NASCAR's at. We have a guy like Jimmie Johnson who said, yeah, I'm good. I want to retire, but then says, no, I'm actually, what you guys are doing intrigues me and I want to be part of this, not just as a driver, but on the owner. So it's good to see it happen. It's good to have him back. And I think it speaks to NASCAR where they're at. If you have a lot of different big names, whether it's a Jimmie Johnson or Travis Pastrana, or even a guy like a Connor Daly who comes over from IndyCar and tries to make the Daytona 500. You just have a blend of different drivers with diverse backgrounds coming over here and trying to do, having success on the racetrack.
Yeah, where would you say his value is most added? Is it just having his name, his resume sort of associated with an ownership stake, or does it go deeper than that? I mean, he obviously has won as many championships as he's won for a reason. I mean, is he making sort of valuable decisions as it relates to cars and drivers and how that team's ultimately going to function?
It's a little bit of everything. One, he's a 7-time champion. He has a name brand, and he has a name and he has a resume of success that sponsors want to attach themselves to. But Jimmie's also been with the Hendrick Motorsports for a long time. He saw how they operated, saw what the key to the key ingredient to their success was, and he's able now over at Legacy Motor Club to say, hey, this is what we did at Hendrick. How about we do this here and implement different ideas? And you talk to the people over at that team, and he's already brought a wealth of knowledge base, not just helping his teammates Noah Gragson and Eric Jones, who run for the team full time, but also behind the scenes as well, saying, hey, let's try this. Why don't we do this? So it's definitely a learning curve. They're definitely building something over there, and it's going to take a while before you kind of see the results. But you look at what they have over there, and it looks like they have an opportunity to really have some long-term success once they kind of get their feet on the ground and get things moving.
All right, Jordan, I'll get you out of here with this because I've kept you too long already. But is there anything else that I'm missing in terms of big storylines that you're watching for either this weekend or over the next couple of weeks in NASCAR that you feel like might not be getting the attention it deserves, or something that you're going to be keeping your eye on at Daytona?
It's really kind of what we talked about, which is parity. And that's the big thing this year, is whether you're going to still see a variety of different winners, whether small teams can compete with the big teams, whether teams like Trackhouse in 2311 can take that next step and become those next great teams. Because Hendrick Motorsports, Team Penske, Joe Gibbs Racing have been around for 30 plus years, right? And who's going to join them? Is there a team that's capable of joining them? We'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting. I think there's a lot of transition right now in the driver ranks. We mentioned Kurt Busch stepping away, but Kevin Harvick's last year. We don't know about Martin Truex Jr.'s future beyond this year. There's a little bit of a transition here between the old and the new, and we're seeing that continue to play out. So that's something to keep an eye on throughout the year.
Yeah, just quickly, did some of those old drivers need to exit to make way for this new group and to really truly give them their time, which is right now, obviously, as NASCAR is facing this sort of renaissance. Those guys, some of those big personalities, those big drivers, they loom very large over everybody else. And for so long, people have said like, oh, well, the new guys have to find their personalities. They got to step up. They got to take it. They have to own it. I don't know if that's true. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks like the old guard needs to step away so that the new guys can come in.
It's hard for young drivers to have success when the old guard is winning all the races, right, and hogging the attention. Now you can just say go out there and be better than them, and that's fine. But you're right, to some degree there are opportunities, and when a Dale Earnhardt Jr. steps away, it opens an opportunity up for Alex Bowman, and Alex Bowman may not have had that opportunity otherwise. When Jeff Gordon steps away, Chase Elliott is there to kind of step into his spot. So there is something to be said for that. Of hey, it's the old guys kind of got to move on their way, and it opens up the door for the young guys. But NASCAR is struggled a little bit over the years with how that transition works. I think they kind of got it right this way because there's been a nice mix, but it's not always, doesn't always go as smoothly as you want to. But in this case, it did work out for them because again, you have guys like a Chase Elliott or a Kyle Larson or a Chase Briscoe stepping into the spotlight a little bit and kind of taking the bull by the horns.
Yeah, Jordan Bianchi, fantastic analysis. Thank you so much from The Athletic. Best of luck this weekend. Covering the race is going to be exciting. It always delivers. Thanks for being with me.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.